Millionaire asked his son to choose a mother among the models, but he chose the black maid asterisk. Leonard Harrington was a man whose very name carried the weight of gold, pride, and arrogance across the city. He had built his empire through ruthless deals, clever investments, and an iron will that crushed competition. And his mansion stood like a glittering fortress on the hill, a symbol of power that dared the world to look up in awe or in envy. But beneath all the wealth, one truth remained that Leonard could never escape. He was a widower, raising a boy without a mother, and though he buried that truth under layers of luxury, his son Samuel, only 7 years old, carried the ache in his innocent heart. He asked questions that made Leonard uncomfortable. Questions like, "Daddy, why don't I have a mommy like my friends?" And though Leonard dismissed them with gifts, toys, and extravagant trips, he knew deep inside that one day the absence would become too glaring. And so, in his vanity and in his pride, he hatched a plan so bizarre, so arrogant, that only a man blinded by wealth would think it reasonable. He would hold a contest, an audition of sorts, to allow his son to choose a mother not out of love, but out of spectacle. And so it began. Invitations were sent to the city's most glamorous models, women who graced magazine covers, whose names echoed in fashion shows, whose beauty was painted on billboards. They arrived in sleek cars, dripping with diamonds, each knowing that stepping into Leonard's mansion could mean stepping into unimaginable fortune. Because to be chosen as the wife of Leonard Harrington meant never worrying again about bills, debts, or fading fame. It meant sealing a future wrapped in wealth. The mansion on that evening looked like a palace prepared for royalty, with chandeliers lit like constellations, velvet carpets laid down the halls, and a gathering of staff rushing to ensure perfection. Yet, in the far corner of the house, Angela, the maid, dressed in her modest black and white uniform, carried trays of glasses, arranging flowers, trying to stay unseen. For she was only a servant, and servants were never meant to be part of Leonard's world of glamour. Samuel, meanwhile, sat quietly in a small chair beside his father, clutching his favorite toy car, his large innocent eyes scanning the room not with delight, but with confusion. Because to him, the women who filed in, smiling too wide, bending too low to greet him, felt strange and frightening, their perfume heavy, their voices rehearsed. Leonard, however, was in his element. Standing tall in his tailored suit, he declared with a smirk that silenced the chatter, "Ladies, tonight is not about me, but about my son, Samuel. He is my pride, my heir, and the future of everything I've built. Tonight, he will choose which among you will have the honor of being his mother, and whoever he chooses will step into this mansion not as a guest, but as family." The room gasped, some laughed nervously, but no one dared question him, for the promise of wealth was too tempting. The models lined up, each more dazzling than the next, their gowns shimmering like oceans of jewels, their lips painted like roses, their eyes calculating as they sized up the boy who held the key to their dreams. Leonard leaned down toward Samuel and said in a voice that carried both encouragement and command, "Look carefully, son. These are women of grace and beauty, the finest you will ever meet, and today you will decide which one deserves to be your mother." Samuel blinked, his small fingers tightening on the toy car. He looked at the women, their smiles too sharp, their eyes too eager, and for a moment he froze, the weight of expectation too heavy on his little shoulders, until his gaze drifted away, past the glitter, past the perfume, past the painted faces, toward the corner of the room where Angela stood, her tray of glasses trembling slightly in her hands as she tried to remain unnoticed. Angela had been with the household for 3 years, quietly doing her duties, cleaning, cooking, tucking Samuel into bed when his father was away, soothing his nightmares with gentle whispers of old stories, tying his shoelaces before school, holding his hand when he felt lonely. She had never imagined herself as anything more than a shadow in the grand halls of wealth. Yet to Samuel, She was warmth, safety, and the closest thing to a mother he had ever known. And in that moment, Samuel's heart knew what his father's eyes refused to see. He slid off his chair without a word, his small shoes tapping against the polished floor, and before anyone could guess his intent, he ran not toward the line of glittering models who leaned forward expectantly, but straight across the room, past the gasps and whispers, straight into the arms of Angela, burying his face into her apron and clinging to her, as though letting go would break him. The room froze, the silence deafening, until Samuel's clear voice broke through. I want her. I want her to be my mommy. Shock rippled like an earthquake. The models' painted smiles shattered into scowls and disbelief. Some scoffed audibly, others exchanged glares, while Leonard's face turned crimson with humiliation. He barked, "What nonsense is this, boy? Look again. These women are here for you, for us. You can't choose a maid. She's a servant. She's nothing like them." But Samuel only hugged Angela tighter, his little voice trembling but firm. "She loves me, Daddy. She loves me, and I feel it. I want her." Angela herself was frozen, tears threatening her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest because she had never imagined this. Never thought Samuel's innocent affection could be spoken so boldly in a room filled with wealth and arrogance. She wanted to tell him no, to tell him this wasn't possible, but her arms betrayed her as they wrapped around him protectively, because, in her heart, Samuel had long been like a son. The models erupted in murmurs, some storming out in anger, muttering insults about wasting their time and being humiliated by a child. Others stayed, hoping Leonard would dismiss this childish outburst and restore order. Leonard, however, laughed nervously, trying to cover the embarrassment. Children don't know what they want. He's just confused. Of course, when he grows, he'll understand beauty, elegance, status. But the seed of shame was already planted, and whispers soon traveled beyond the mansion walls. Staff members whispered in corridors, and by morning, rumors reached the newspapers. Millionaire's son rejects models, chooses Maid as mother. Leonard's business associates at the country club chuckled behind his back, mocking, "Your boy has a different taste. Leonard, maybe he knows something you don't." The humiliation burned him, yet deeper than the anger was a sliver of fear. Fear that perhaps his son saw a truth that money could not buy. That night Samuel refused dinner unless Angela sat beside him. He refused to sleep unless Angela tucked him in, and Leonard, pacing in his study, poured himself whiskey after whiskey, his mind boiling. He considered firing Angela immediately, erasing her from Samuel's life, but the thought of his son's tears restrained him. He muttered to himself, "This is temporary. He'll forget. I'll make him forget." But Samuel did not forget. The next morning, as soon as he woke, he ran straight into Angela's arms again, laughter bursting like sunlight through clouds. The staff saw, the whispers grew louder, and Leonard's pride felt cornered. He told himself he would crush this nonsense, that he would remind both his son and the maid of their places. But destiny had already begun its slow, unstoppable march, and no wealth, no pride, no arrogance could stop what was coming next. The news spread like wildfire, traveling faster than Leonard could contain it. Because in a world where wealth was worshipped, the scandal of a millionaire's son rejecting beauty queens for a maid was too delicious for society to ignore. Whispers floated in salons, headlines hinted at humiliation, tabloids printed speculative stories, and by the time Leonard sat down for breakfast at his grand oak table, his phone was already buzzing with calls from associates, partners, and even rivals, mocking him, asking, "Is it true your son wants to marry the help?" Leonard's pride roared. He slammed his fist against the table, startling Samuel, who sat with his cereal. But Samuel didn't care about the shouting. He only looked at Angela, who gently placed a glass of milk before him and smiled as though the storm didn't exist. And in that moment, Leonard realized the biggest threat wasn't the gossip, it was the bond between the maid and his son. a bond stronger than wealth, stronger than shame, and so he decided he would end it. That afternoon he called Angela to his study, the walls lined with books and trophies, his presence heavy like a king summoning a subject, and when she entered nervously, hands folded before her, he didn't waste words. "You will resign today," he barked, his tone sharp. "I pay you well. You'll leave with a bonus, but you will never step foot in this mansion again. My son will forget you, and this nonsense will be buried." Angela's lips trembled, but before she could reply, a small voice from the doorway cut through the tension Samuel had overheard, his eyes wide with tears welling. "No, Daddy. Please, don't send her away. Please." He ran forward, clutching Angela's skirt, as though holding her would anchor her to his world. Leonard's chest tightened with frustration. "Samuel, go to your room." But the boy shook his head violently, crying, "I don't want a mommy from your parties. I want her. She loves me. You don't even see it." The words sliced through Leonard like glass. How dare his own son accuse him of not seeing, of not loving? He dismissed Angela with a glare, but she, with trembling courage, spoke for the first time with firmness. "Sir, I never encouraged him. I never asked for this. Samuel chose with his heart, and maybe instead of being angry at me, you should ask why he feels what he feels." Her voice shook, but her truth landed heavy, and Leonard found himself speechless for a second, before rage consumed him again. "Get out," he growled, and she left, her back straight, though tears brimmed her eyes. That night, Leonard locked himself in his room with bottles of liquor, replaying the humiliation in his head. But Samuel refused to eat, refused to sleep, banging on his door, screaming for Angela, until the staff, in sympathy, sneaked her into his room just to calm him down. And Leonard, overhearing his son's soft laughter in her presence, felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years, guilt. But pride was his armor, and he would not surrender it. Days passed, and the scandal deepened. Gossip columns wrote of a possible Cinderella story. Reporters camped outside the gates, curious to glimpse the maid who stole the spotlight, and Leonard's business rivals used it to taunt him in meetings, questioning his judgment as a father and as a man. He couldn't bear it, so he dug into Angela's past, determined to find dirt, something that would discredit her, something that would prove she was unworthy. And when the private investigator he hired returned with a file, Leonard opened it with greedy satisfaction, but what he read froze him. Angela Johnson, 29, born in the poorer district of the city. Raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Angela had been a brilliant student, scoring top marks in school, offered scholarships, but she had dropped out of college when her mother fell ill, sacrificing her dreams to work as a maid to pay for hospital bills. After her mother's passing, she continued working to support her younger siblings. Never once arrested, never once involved in scandal, her record clean, her life marked only by sacrifice and resilience. Leonard closed the file, his hand shaking, because instead of finding dirt, he found dignity, a kind of dignity that mocked his shallow wealth. The next morning, Samuel dragged Angela to the breakfast table, proudly announcing, "Daddy, Mommy made pancakes." And Leonard, staring at the simple meal, felt his pride bruise again. But behind Samuel's laughter, he noticed the softness in Angela's eyes, the kind of softness he hadn't seen since his wife had died, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered if Samuel had seen something he had been blind to. But Leonard hardened again. He invited more models to the house, trying to tempt Samuel with gifts, with promises of glamorous mothers. But every time Samuel turned away, clutching Angela's hand tighter. The staff began to side quietly with the boy, seeing in Angela not just a maid, but a mother in spirit, and Leonard felt his control slipping. One evening, during a grand dinner he hosted 4 business elites, Samuel embarrassed him again. When a guest asked jokingly who his mother was, the boy proudly pointed at Angela, who was serving dishes, and said, She is my mummy." The room fell into stunned silence before laughter erupted, and Leonard's face turned purple with rage. He dismissed Angela immediately from the dining hall, humiliating her in front of everyone, and Samuel ran out crying, leaving the guests whispering that the great Leonard Harrington had lost control of his own household. That night, Angela packed her small bag, ready to leave quietly to save Samuel from more pain. But the boy caught her in the hallway, tears streaming down his cheeks, begging, "Please don't go. Please, you promised you'd never leave me." Angela knelt, holding his face in her hands, whispering, "I never want to leave you, Samuel, but sometimes love means stepping away so you don't get hurt." Samuel clung to her, refusing to let go, and Leonard, watching from the shadows, felt a conflict raging inside him. Part of him wanted to drag her out, but another part, buried deep, whispered that maybe his son wasn't wrong. The breaking point came days later, when Samuel fell sick with a fever. Doctors were called, medicines given, but he refused them all, unless Angela was at his side, holding his hand, telling him stories, and it was only her voice that calmed him, her touch that soothed him, her presence that made him sleep. Leonard stood at the doorway of his son's room, watching as Angela sang softly, and for the first time in years, he felt powerless, realizing his money, his status, his pride could not do what this maid's love could. Yet, even then, he could not admit it. He told himself it was temporary, that Samuel was just a child, but deep inside, cracks began to form in his arrogance. Angela's past, once hidden, began to come to light, as Samuel asked her to tell him stories of her childhood. She spoke of poverty, of struggle, of losing her mother, of caring for her siblings, and the boy listened, wide-eyed, saying, "You're braver than Daddy, you're a hero," words that echoed in Leonard's ears, haunting him. The society outside continued to mock. The whispers grew sharper, and Leonard's friends advised him, "Send the maid away, adopt a respectable woman. Restore your image." But every time he looked at Samuel, every time he saw his son's unwavering love for Angela, his resolve wavered. The maid had become more than a servant. She had become the heart of the house. And though Leonard fought it with all his pride, destiny was dragging him toward a truth he could not escape. And as the storm outside the mansion grew louder, as the world mocked and judged, a secret waited in Angela's past, a secret that, once revealed, would shake Leonard's world to its core and make him question everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the meaning of family. The storm within the Harrington mansion had reached its peak. Gossip outside raged like wildfire. Leonard's pride was cracked, though not yet shattered. Samuel's devotion to Angela had only deepened, and Angela herself lived every day on edge, unsure if she would be thrown out or tolerated for a little longer. Yet what none of them knew was that fate had been writing a story much deeper than any of them could imagine. A story that tied their lives together long before that fateful evening of the contest. It happened one evening when Leonard, driven by suspicion and the need to protect his empire, confronted Angela directly in the kitchen where she was preparing Samuel's favorite soup. His voice was sharp. "Tell me, why is my son so attached to you? What trick have you played? What charm have you cast? There must be something you're hiding." Angela turned, her eyes steady, her hands trembling only slightly as she placed the ladle down. "I hide nothing, sir, except the scars of a life you could never understand." Leonard scoffed. "Don't play the saint with me. I know you have a past. Everyone does." And that was when Angela, tired of being accused, tired of living in the shadows of whispers, decided to speak the truth she had buried for years. She told him of the night, nearly a decade ago, when she had been working a night shift in a diner downtown, exhausted, broke, her mother sick at home, her siblings hungry, and how a drunken brawl had spilled into the diner, a man collapsing at her feet with a stab wound, bleeding out, and how without hesitation she had pressed her hands against the wound, calling for help, staying by his side until the ambulance arrived, saving his life. And then, with eyes unwavering, she whispered, "That man was you, Mr. Harrington." Leonard froze, his breath catching, because he remembered vaguely that night, long ago, when after a business deal had gone wrong, thugs had cornered him, and one had driven a knife into his side, leaving him gasping for life. He had never seen the face of the woman who helped him. He only remembered the warmth of hands pressing his wound, the soothing voice telling him to hold on, and he had dismissed it later as the work of paramedics. But now, looking at Angela, realization struck him like lightning. The maid he had despised, the woman his son adored, was the same one who had saved his life when he was most vulnerable. For the first time in years, Leonard felt his arrogance falter completely. He sank into a chair, staring at her, as though seeing her for the first time, whispering, "It was you." Angela nodded, her eyes wet but firm. "Yes, and I never wanted you to know, because I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right." Silence stretched, broken only by the clink of the soup simmering on the stove, and Leonard, for the first time, felt a wave of gratitude so raw, it unsettled him. Later that night, as Samuel curled in Angela's lap, listening to her soft humming, Leonard stood at the doorway, watching, the revelation burning in his chest. His pride screamed to stay silent, but his heart whispered that perhaps his son had been right all along, that love, loyalty, and worth could never be measured in wealth. The next days tested him further. Society's gossip turned crueler, calling Angela a gold digger, calling Samuel confused, mocking Leonard as a fool who had lost control of his household, and yet inside the mansion the truth had shifted. Leonard began noticing the little things, how Angela remembered every detail about Samuel's likes and fears, how her presence calmed storms that no money could fix, how her strength came not from status, but from sacrifice. One evening, when Samuel fell ill again, with a deeper fever, Leonard sat beside his son's bed, for the first time in years, watching helplessly as doctors came and went. But nothing soothed the boy until Angela entered quietly, placing a cool cloth on his forehead, whispering, "I'm here, my little one, I'm here." And Samuel's eyes fluttered open with a smile, his fever breaking as though her voice alone carried healing. Leonard's eyes welled up against his will. He realized he had never been able to do for his son what this woman, this maid, did effortlessly love. The breaking point came during a gala Leonard was forced to attend, where the whispers grew into open insults, with rivals sneering. "So, Leonard, when do we meet the new maidwife?" Laughter erupted around him, but instead of fury, Leonard felt a strange calm. And when one particularly cruel remark was made about Samuel's choice being childish, Leonard stood, his voice cutting through the room like steel. "My son chose with his heart, something many of you lost long ago, and perhaps, just perhaps, he is wiser than all of us." The room fell silent, shocked at the crack in the armor of the arrogant millionaire, but Leonard didn't care anymore. For the first time, he was speaking a truth deeper than wealth. Returning home, he found Samuel asleep in Angela's lap, her head bowed, her eyes tired but peaceful, and something within him broke. The last wall of his pride crumbled, and he whispered softly, "Thank you." Angela looked up, surprised. "For what, sir?" And Leonard's voice trembled as he said, "For saving my life then, and for saving it again now, through my son." Tears brimmed her eyes, and though no more words were exchanged, something shifted forever. Days later, Leonard called for a private family gathering in the mansion's great hall, summoning the staff, his son, and Angela. And in front of them all, he announced, "I built this empire with wealth, but my son has taught me that true wealth is love. And today, I honor his choice." He turned to Angela, his voice steady, though his eyes shone. "Angela, you have been more of a mother to Samuel than anyone could ever be, and I was blind not to see it. Will you stay, not as a maid, but as part of this family?" Gasps filled the room. Samuel leaped with joy, hugging Angela tightly, crying, "I told you, Daddy, I told you, she's the one." And Angela, tears streaming, whispered, "Yes, I will stay." The staff clapped, Samuel beamed, and for the first time, the Harrington mansion glowed, not with chandeliers, but with love. The scandal outside eventually died, for people grew bored and moved on to the next gossip. But within the walls of the mansion, a new story was written of a millionaire who learned that pride is nothing without love, of a boy who reminded the world that children see truth, adults forget, and of a woman whose worth was never in diamonds or gowns, but in the purity of her sacrifice. Angela never wore the crown of models, never stepped on runways, but she wore something richer, the title of mother, carved not by wealth, but by love. And Leonard, once blind, finally saw. And so, the story ended not with a contest, but with redemption, with a family forged not by money, but by the simple, unshakable power of love. And the boy who once longed for a mother finally found one, not in the glitter of the world, but in the heart of the maid who became everything.